There is a trap built specifically for people who do the reading. The more you understand the system, the more precisely you can identify everything that could go wrong inside it. The more you can articulate the mechanism, the more layers of self-awareness you bring to every attempt, and the more crowded that space becomes before you ever act. Knowing too much is its own kind of blockage, and the proof is right there in what you have already noticed. The people who study this the least seem to get results faster than the people who study it the most. You have probably noticed that. Someone who barely knows what manifestation means stumbles into exactly the life you have been deliberately constructing for 2 years, and you are left standing there with a vision board, a meditation practice, and a very precise description of what you want. Nothing has locked into place. That gap is not a motivation problem. It is not a belief problem. It is not a sign that the system is broken. It is a signal problem. There is one step, a single structural step, that every book on this subject quietly skips, not because the authors are wrong, because most of them do not know it is missing. They have given you a circuit with an open wire and told you to flip the switch, and then they wonder why the lights will not come on. By the time this ends, you will know exactly where that wire is, and you will not be able to unknow it. Chapter 1. You already know too much to manifest. For as long as human beings have gathered together and looked at the distance between where they stood and where they wanted to be, a certain kind of knowledge has moved among them. It passed through temples and trading posts, through letters written by firelight and conversations held at the edges of deserts. In every age, in every part of the world, a small number of people seem to operate from a different set of rules. Not because they were born different, not because fortune had handed them something it refused to hand others. They had encountered a particular piece of understanding about how desire and result actually connect, and they had used it. That understanding has been named many things in many languages. You are holding one version of it right now. But here is what no version has bothered to tell you. There is a step in that process that every popular version skips, and that missing step is the precise reason you are still here, still learning, still waiting. You have not failed to apply what you know. You have applied too much of the wrong part and left out the one piece that makes everything else work. Picture your morning. Maybe 6 months ago, maybe last week. You wake up, and before the day has its hands on you, you go through the ritual. You read the affirmations written on an index card or saved in your phone. You sit in front of the vision board, the printed photograph of the house, or the number in the bank account, or the life that feels like it belongs to someone further along than you. You close your eyes and try to feel it, really feel it, the way every book told you to. You reach for the emotion, and for a moment maybe you touch something, a flicker of warmth, a sense of possibility. Then your phone buzzes, or the silence breaks, or your own doubt walks back into the room uninvited. The feeling dissolves like steam. You go about your day, nothing changes. You return tomorrow and do it again. That ritual is not the problem. That is not what you need to stop doing. But there is a question embedded in that routine that nobody has asked you yet. Here it is. What is your signal actually doing when it leaves you? Think about a radio antenna. Not the clean digital signal of today, but an older kind, the kind mounted on a rooftop pulling transmissions out of thin air. When that antenna is properly tuned, the signal arrives clean and sharp. But when interference is present, when competing frequencies crowd the same band, When the antenna itself is vibrating at the wrong rate, what comes through is not music. What comes through is static. The tune is buried inside it, technically present but completely unreadable. No one listening on the receiving end can pull it out. The broadcast exists. The broadcast is simply jammed. You are that antenna. Every affirmation you have ever spoken, every vision you have ever held, every emotional state you have ever manufactured on purpose, those were all broadcasts, and most of them reached nothing. Not because the principle behind them is false, but because something in your own system was generating static at the exact same frequency. The signal and the interference left the antenna together. They canceled each other out before they reached anything. Soon, you will come to a point about the relationship between wanting something and receiving it that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it immediately changes how you act every single day. But first, you need to understand what creates the static. And to understand that, you need to meet the person who made you see it. His name was Daniel Avery, not a famous man, a contractor in his early 30s who had spent 2 years doing everything the books told him to do. He had read the classics, watched the documentaries, listened to hours of recorded seminars during his commute. He had a note on his bathroom mirror that said he was magnetic, prosperous, and aligned with his highest purpose. He had a specific dollar figure written on a card in his wallet, the amount he wanted his business to generate in a year. He said it aloud each morning. He visualized the signed contracts, the larger crew, the truck that did not break down every 3rd week. He did the work. He was consistent. He was earnest. And his business earned almost exactly what it had earned the year before, and the year before that. Daniel was not lazy. That is what made it so disorienting. He had done the reading. He had applied the methods, but his results looked identical to those of men who had never heard of any of it. One evening he sat in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store and said out loud, to no one, "What is wrong with me?" Not as a question, as a verdict. He had already decided the answer was something internal, something broken in him specifically, something that made the methods work for other people but not for him. He was right that the problem was internal. He was completely wrong about what the problem was. Daniel had filled his mind so thoroughly with techniques, with competing methods, with the voice of one author contradicting the approach of another, that his internal signal had become a crowded frequency. Every time he sat down to visualize, he was not broadcasting one clear desire. He was broadcasting the desire. He was also broadcasting the doubt from every time it had not worked before, the anxiety about whether he was doing it correctly. The voice of one mentor saying emotion was everything, and another saying emotion did not matter. Underneath all of that sat one more signal, the embarrassed fear that this was nonsense, and he was a grown man talking to himself in a mirror. The antenna was transmitting all of it, equally, at once. The signal existed. The static simply won. Picture the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not in a vague sense. Specifically, what were you worried about at 3 in the morning? What did your bank account look like on the 15th of the month when rent had just cleared? What were you telling yourself about why you were not further along? Now think about what you have learned since then. The books, the podcasts, the courses, the methods you explored and applied and eventually set aside. You have consumed an enormous amount of material about how to create a better life. And still, right now, something brought you here to this chapter. which means part of what you learned worked and part of it did not. You know it. You have known it for a while. The question is not whether you believe in the process. You do. Otherwise, you would not still be here. The question is why the process keeps producing incomplete results. Here is the answer, and it is not comfortable, but it is precise. Consuming more technique without removing the core interference does not improve your signal. It thickens the static. Every new method you learn becomes another competing voice in the broadcast. Every new approach that does not produce results adds to the archive of evidence your nervous system is quietly building against the whole enterprise. You do not need more knowledge about manifestation. You need less noise so the signal you already carry can actually reach something. This is the missing step, not an additional technique, not a more advanced visualization, not a different affirmation structure or a new moon ritual or a revised version of the same basic instruction. The missing step is the removal of the interference that all the previous steps created, and no previous teacher bothered to address. Because addressing it requires admitting that the teaching itself contributed to the problem, and most teachers will not say that. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You are not missing some spiritual gift that other people possess and you were denied. You are an antenna generating a strong signal that is accompanied by equally strong static, and no one has shown you how to separate them. That changes here. Not because you will learn a new method to add to the pile, but because for the first time you are going to put the pile down. You are going to look at the interference directly. Name it. Understand exactly how it formed, why it is so persistent, and what a single deliberate act of removal actually feels like. When you have done that, everything you already know will have room to work. The techniques you spent years learning are not wasted. They were always capable. They were simply jammed. The antenna has not failed. It has been waiting for quiet. And the first thing you will have to quiet is the belief you may not even know you are holding. The belief that knowing more is the same as being ready. It is not. Knowing more, without the step this book is about to give you, is the very thing standing between you and the result you have been building toward for years. So the real question is not whether you can manifest what you want. The real question is this: what exactly have you been broadcasting without knowing it? Chapter 2: Why Believing Harder Makes It Worse. Most people trying to manifest a better life believe the same thing. They believe the reason it is not working is that they do not believe hard enough. Hold the thought stronger. Visualize with more feeling. Push through the doubt. Almost every book, course, and video on this subject tells them the same thing: more belief, more intensity, more repetition. And almost everyone who follows that advice hits the exact same invisible wall. They are not failing because their belief is too weak. They are failing because they are believing wrong, not slightly off course, structurally, mechanically wrong. The reason this is so hard to see is that trying harder feels like doing something. It feels like progress. It looks like effort. But inside the system that actually governs what you attract, effort is not a signal of faith. Effort is a signal of resistance. This chapter is going to show you exactly why, and what Marcus learned the hard way over 3 years of trying everything the books told him to do. Think about the last time you tried to remember a name. You knew it. It was right there. And the harder you reached for it, the further away it got. The moment you stopped trying, it arrived on its own. That is not coincidence. That is the system working exactly as it was built to work. Marcus was 28 years old when he found his first book on the law of attraction. He had a decent job doing logistics coordination for a regional warehouse company, a one-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of the previous tenant, and a precise, specific dream. He wanted to own a small restaurant with his younger sister. Not a franchise, not a chain, a real place. 12 tables, a menu that changed with the season, their grandmother's soup on Fridays. He could see the whole thing. He wrote it down every morning. He made a vision board. He listened to meditations on abundance before bed. He did everything right. 18 months passed. Nothing moved. So Marcus doubled down. He started waking up earlier. He spent 40 minutes a morning in visualization instead of 20. He wrote his affirmations 50 times by hand the way one book recommended. He found a new teacher online who said the problem was emotional intensity, that he needed to feel the vision more deeply, not just think it. So Marcus cried during his visualizations. He shook his hands to force the energy through. He told himself out loud every single morning that the restaurant was already his, and still nothing moved. The bank account stayed the same. The warehouse job stayed the same. The apartment still smelled like someone else's life. And here is the part nobody warned Marcus about. He started to feel worse, not better. There was a new feeling layered underneath the morning rituals now. Something tight. Something that lived right behind the chest and would not leave. That feeling had a name. He just did not recognize it yet. Here is what was actually happening inside Marcus during those 40-minute sessions. His conscious mind was performing belief. It was doing exactly what the book said, generating the image, attaching the feeling, speaking the words with conviction. But there was another layer operating at the same time. A layer deeper and older and far more powerful. And that layer was watching all of this effort and drawing a very precise conclusion. It was concluding that the thing Marcus wanted was not real yet. Because here is the signal that effort sends. When you try hard to believe something, the trying contains within it a very clear message. The thing you are trying to believe is not yet true. You do not try to believe your own name. You do not force conviction about where you went to school or what year you were born. Those things do not require effort because they are not in question. The moment you strain to hold a belief, you have already told the deepest part of your mind that the belief is contested. The system does not hear the content of what you are saying. It reads the frequency beneath it. Revisit the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Whatever your life looked like then, your account balance, your confidence, the way you talked to yourself at night when the apartment was quiet, think about what you believed without trying. Not what you hoped, not what you visualized, what you simply, without effort, expected. That expectation, that quiet, settled certainty, was the real broadcast, not the affirmations, not the vision board, the quiet thing underneath. That is the signal the universe, or your brain, or your behavior, depending on how you think about these things, actually receives. And this is where the circuit goes incomplete. Earlier in this book, you heard about the radio antenna, about static, about how a signal mudded by interference will never reach its destination clearly. What most people do not realize is that the interference is not coming from doubt on its own. Doubt, sitting quietly, is just a feeling. The interference comes from the collision, the conscious mind broadcasting one thing while the deeper system simultaneously broadcasts its correction. That collision is static. That static drowns everything. Marcus was not failing because he lacked desire. His desire was enormous. He was failing because every morning he sat down to manufacture belief. He was also creating a simultaneous and louder countersignal. A signal that said, I am working this hard because I do not yet have what I want. I am forcing this feeling because it is not natural. I need to perform this ritual because without it, I believe the opposite. Here is a question worth sitting with. Have you ever noticed that the things you manifest almost effortlessly are never the things you were desperately trying to manifest? Small things arrive, unexpected calls, parking spots, the right person appearing at the right time. You did not perform any ritual for those. You did not hold a 40-minute visualization. You either expected them casually or you simply did not think about them at all. The circuit was clean. There was no friction between what your conscious mind said and what your deeper system believed. The forced version always has friction. Now here is the hope, and pay attention to this, because it changes the entire way you will approach what comes next. The problem is not that you believe the wrong things. The problem is not even that you doubt. Doubt is not the enemy. Doubt is just information. The problem is specifically the strategy of using effort to override doubt. Because that strategy confirms the doubt at the very moment it is trying to erase it, which means the solution is not to believe harder. The solution is to stop using belief as a force and start using it as a ground. There is a difference between believing something as an act and believing something as a state. When you perform belief, you are generating a signal. When you inhabit belief, you are becoming the frequency. One requires maintenance. One does not. One creates the collision that generates static. One removes the collision entirely. Marcus eventually found this out, not from a book, ironically, but from his sister. She had been quietly moving the whole time he was visualizing. She had taken a part-time job at a restaurant 2 nights a week, not because she thought it would manifest their dream faster, but because she genuinely liked learning the kitchen. She had started talking to the owner. She had stopped treating the restaurant as a destination and started treating it as a direction. She was not performing belief. She was living inside a story that already included it. 3 years after Marcus found his first book, the restaurant opened. But it opened because of what his sister had built, not because of what Marcus had visualized. He was there on opening night. He was grateful. But he sat with something uncomfortable in his chest all evening, a question he could not quite answer. What had he been doing wrong exactly for 3 years? Why had all that effort produced nothing while his sister's quiet, practical movement had built something real? He did not have the answer yet, and neither do you. Not fully. Because the answer is not just about action over visualization. That is too simple, and it is also wrong. Marcus's sister was not successful because she worked hard. She was successful because of something she did not even know she was doing. Something that happens beneath strategy, beneath willpower, beneath effort of any kind. Later on, you will come to a point about action and its relationship to manifestation that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, it immediately changes what you do first thing in the morning. The core truth of this chapter is this: effortful belief is not a stronger version of belief. It is evidence of its opposite. The system does not measure your conviction. It reads the signal behind the conviction. And when the signal says, "I am trying," what the system hears is, "I am not yet certain." That is the incomplete circuit. That is the static. That is what has been neutralizing every technique you already know. So the question is not how to believe harder. The question is what would have to change inside you so that belief required no effort at all. Chapter 3. Manifestation has a hardware problem. Feeling something deeply is not enough to make it real. That sounds like a dismissal of everything you have been told about the power of belief. It is not. It is a precise description of why thousands of people who feel their desires with genuine intensity still end up in the same financial position year after year, confused and quietly ashamed of a process that was supposed to work by now. Here is the part no one has told you clearly. Feeling is not the transmission. The body is the transmission. And if the body is running in a state of chronic alarm, it does not matter how vivid your visualizations are. It does not matter how many times you write your goals into a leather journal at 6 in the morning. The signal is broken before it leaves the room. This chapter is about the hardware. It is about the part of you that sits underneath the techniques, underneath the positive thinking, underneath the vision boards. It is the part that has been silently canceling every signal you have ever sent. The last chapter handed you a question and left it unresolved. What would have to change inside you so that belief required no effort at all? Hold that question. You are about to find out. Open that question and keep it open. The answer is not what you expect. Think about a phone. Imagine you are standing in a city with perfect signal coverage. The towers are everywhere. The network is strong. Every bar is lit up on every other device around you, but your phone has a cracked antenna. A small, invisible fracture in the component that receives and transmits. You open an app. It spins. You try to send a message. It fails. You stare at the bars and cannot figure out why nothing is connecting because from the outside everything looks like it should work. You have the right phone. You have the right network. You are doing exactly what everyone else is doing. The only difference is a fracture you cannot see. That is your nervous system when it is dysregulated. Most manifestation teaching is about the towers. It tells you to strengthen the signal source, think better, feel more, believe harder, visualize in greater detail. And the towers are real. The signal genuinely matters. But if your receiver is cracked, stronger towers only produce stronger failed connections. The problem was never the transmission. It was always the hardware sitting inside your body. Here is what dysregulation actually means in plain terms. Your nervous system has a job. Its one and only job from the perspective of survival is to assess whether you are safe or whether you are not. When it decides you are not safe, and this decision happens below your conscious awareness in fractions of a second based on patterns set down years before you had words for any of them, it redirects every available resource toward managing that threat. Blood, breath, attention, neurochemistry, all of it gets pulled. In that state, the part of your brain responsible for imagination, for possibility, for encoding new beliefs about what your life could look like, goes dim. Not off, just dim. Like a bulb with a bad connection, flickering enough that you can see the room but not clearly enough to read by. You have been trying to read by a flickering light. Call up the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not in terms of circumstances. Inside. Were you relaxed when you thought about money? When you pictured your bank account, did your chest stay easy? Or did something in you clench, contract, drop a few degrees colder? That contraction is not a feeling. It is a physiological event. Your nervous system saw the word money and ran its old program. The one it learned when money meant conflict in the house, or embarrassment at school, or watching someone you loved look frightened. It ran that program and your body responded. And in that moment, every technique you layered on top, every affirmation, every visualization, every page of a gratitude journal was being transmitted through a system in active alarm. You cannot broadcast a frequency of safety from a body that is running a code of danger. Not sustainably. Not in a way that completes the circuit. This is the hardware problem. There is a woman named Clara. She had read every book. She had the yellow highlighters and the annotated margins and the morning routine that started before the sun came up. 30 minutes of meditation, scripting, visualization. She would sit in her small apartment and picture the apartment she wanted, the work she wanted, the account balance she wanted, and she would genuinely try, to feel it as though it were already real. Some mornings she could almost get there, that warm floating sensation the books described, but within 20 minutes of starting her day, something would tighten. An email from her landlord about a rent increase, a number in her checking account that had not moved the way she hoped. Her body would register these things and pull back, hard, into its default setting. Vigilance. She had grown up in a household where things could go wrong without warning. Her nervous system had learned to stay ready for that. To never fully relax. To always have one ear listening for the sound of something about to fall. She did not know this was happening. She thought she was not believing hard enough. She thought the problem was her conviction. It was not her conviction. It was her antenna. The moment Clara understood that her morning practice was being transmitted through a body still running a 12-year-old alarm response, everything she had been doing looked different. The practice had not been wrong. It had been incomplete. She had been doing the equivalent of typing a perfect message on a cracked phone and pressing send, then wondering why nothing arrived. The technique was sound. The hardware was broken. What changed for Clara is coming, but not yet. Here is the thing about nervous system states that almost no one in the manifestation space talks about plainly. You cannot think your way out of a physiological state. That sentence is worth sitting with. Thinking is a product of the state. It is downstream. If your body is in alarm, your thoughts are going to organize themselves around that alarm whether you want them to or not. You might notice the thought is negative and try to replace it. But replacement thinking without changing the underlying state is like painting over rust. It looks better for a little while. Then the rust bleeds through. This is why people can do the technique correctly for months and feel no movement. Not because the technique is fake, but because technique is software and software cannot run efficiently on corrupted hardware. So what does nervous system coherence actually mean? Coherence is a word from physics. It refers to waves that are in alignment, moving in the same direction, amplifying each other rather than canceling each other out. A coherent signal is clean. A coherent signal carries. When your nervous system is coherent, your heart rhythm, your brainwave activity, and your breath are all moving in a synchronized pattern. Research from the Institute of HeartMath has documented this for decades. In coherence, the body is not in alarm. In coherence, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that encodes new beliefs, imagines new futures, and makes decisions from a sense of possibility rather than threat, is fully online. In that state, the visualization you do is being processed by a brain that can actually receive it. In incoherence, the visualization is happening in a dimly lit room. Now here is the piece that makes this a missing step, and not just an interesting piece of biology. Most manifestation teachers tell you to feel the feeling of the wish fulfilled. That instruction is correct. But what they skip is the prior question. Is the instrument doing the feeling capable of producing that frequency right now? You cannot tune a broken antenna by playing louder music. The missing step is establishing coherence first, before the visualization, before the affirmation, before the scripting, before any of the techniques you have learned and tried and quietly blamed yourself for not using correctly. You have to bring the hardware online. You have to create the physiological conditions in which the signal can actually travel. And this is where that question from the previous chapter resolves. What would have to change inside you so that belief required no effort at all? The answer is not more conviction. The answer is not better technique. The answer is a body that is not spending all of its available energy managing a low-grade sense of threat. Because in that body, belief does not require effort. Belief is simply what the system produces when it is not otherwise occupied with survival. This is the hardware problem stated in its plainest form. You are not broken. Your system is doing exactly what it was built to do. It is protecting you. It is running the programs it was given. But those programs were written for a version of your life that no longer exists, and they are consuming bandwidth you need for something else. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about the role of emotion in manifestation that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it immediately changes how you approach every single technique you have ever tried. But for now, stay with this. Clara figured out that her morning practice was not the problem. She figured out that the 30 minutes of visualization were being swallowed by the other 23.5 hours she spent in a body tuned to vigilance. She did not abandon the practice. She added the step before the practice. She learned to bring her nervous system into coherence first. Not through years of therapy, not through anything complicated, but through a specific sequence that worked with the body's own architecture. The signal was always there. The towers were always broadcasting. The only thing standing between her and a working connection was the antenna she had never thought to repair. Here is the principle this chapter leaves you with. Every technique you know is a message you are trying to send, and the body you live in is the only device that can send it. Chapter 4. Your body votes against your vision board. Every visualization session you have ever done is working against you right now, not because the technique is wrong, not because you lack belief or discipline or desire, but because something is happening inside your body every single moment. It is broadcasting a signal louder than any intention you have ever set. That signal is not subtle. It is chemical. It is electrical. It runs through your nervous system the way water runs through a pipe, constantly, quietly at pressure. And if that signal says threat, your environment responds to threat. The income gap you feel right now, the distance between where you are and where you have been told your thoughts could take you, is not just a gap in belief. It is a gap in biology. That gap is compounding. Every week your body stays in the state it is likely in right now. It costs you something you cannot see on a bank statement. What costs you is this. The signal your body is sending is not the signal your vision board is trying to send. This chapter is going to show you exactly why. The previous chapter left you with this. Every technique you know is a message you are trying to send, and the body you live in is the only device that can send it. Hold that image. Because now we need to look at what happens when the device is broken. Open loop first, because you deserve to know where this is going. There is a research institute that has spent decades measuring the electrical output of the human heart. What they found directly explains why certain people seem to attract results effortlessly, while others work equally hard at the same techniques and stay exactly where they are. You will get to that research. But first, you need to understand what your body is doing on an ordinary Tuesday morning before you have even opened your eyes. Marcus was 28 when he first found a manifestation book. He found it the way most people do, at a low point, thumbing through something a coworker left on the break room table, reading the first chapter standing up because he did not want anyone to see him sit down with it. He took it home. He made the vision board. He downloaded the meditation app. He did the 10 minutes every morning before work, eyes closed, visualizing the promotion, the apartment upgrade, the account balance that would mean he had finally crossed the line from surviving to living. He was consistent. He was sincere. He wanted this to work more than he let himself admit out loud. 3 months in, nothing had moved. Not the promotion, not the apartment, not the number in the account. His coworker got the position he had been quietly picturing for himself. Marcus closed the meditation app. He told himself it was not real. He put the vision board in the closet, spine side out, the way you file away a thing you are embarrassed to have believed in. What Marcus did not know, what nobody told him, was that every single visualization session he had done was being drowned out before it could transmit. Here is what was actually happening inside Marcus during those 10 minutes every morning. He would close his eyes. He would breathe. He would begin picturing the corner office, the handshake, the number. And underneath all of that, invisible but chemically present, his body was running a different program entirely. He had been behind on his student loans for 6 months. His car needed 2 repairs he kept deferring. He had a manager who gave feedback in front of the team in a way that made his chest tight every time he walked through the office door. Marcus was not a man in a calm state picturing a better life. He was a man in a chronic threat state, briefly attempting to overlay a pleasant image on top of a nervous system that was already, at the cellular level, braced for impact. Bring to mind the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Think about the moments when you felt genuinely behind, not just financially, but in the body. The tightness that sits in the shoulders. The way a number on a screen can make your breath go shallow. The kind of sleep that is technically sleep but leaves you unrested. That state has a name in the science. It is called sympathetic activation, and it is doing something specific to your chances of receiving what you are asking for. Your nervous system has 2 primary operating modes. One is oriented toward threat. It sharpens focus on danger, redirects energy toward survival, and narrows your field of perception to what is most immediately risky. The other is oriented toward growth, connection, and possibility. It opens your perception, allows for pattern recognition beyond the immediate moment, and creates the internal conditions where new information can actually land. Stress hormones flood the first mode. They are not a flaw in design. They are exactly what they are supposed to be, a survival mechanism for short, acute danger. The problem is that modern financial stress is not short. It is chronic. It runs 24 hours a day at a low, steady simmer. And a nervous system that never fully exits the threat state is a nervous system that cannot fully open to receive anything new. This is not philosophy. This is measurable. The Institute of Heart Math in California spent years studying the electrical output of the human heart, not the heartbeat itself, but the space between beats, the rhythm, the coherence of that rhythm, and what happens to the body and brain when that rhythm is in a coherent state versus a chaotic one. What they found is that the heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond the body. That field changes measurably depending on the internal emotional state of the person. When a person is in a state of genuine appreciation, calm focus, or what they call heart coherence, the field becomes ordered, measurable, consistent. When a person is in stress, anxiety, or frustration, that field becomes erratic and disordered. And here is the part that matters most. The coherent field and the incoherent field do not produce the same results in the environment around the person. They literally broadcast different signals. This is not a metaphor. This is a measurement. So when Marcus sat down for his 10 minutes every morning, what was he broadcasting? He was overlaying a mental image of success onto a body that was electrically, chemically, hormonally broadcasting threat. Picture a radio station trying to transmit a clear signal while the antenna itself is crackling with interference. The content of the broadcast matters far less than the quality of the signal carrying it. You can have the most precise, emotionally vivid vision board in the world. If the antenna is producing static, the static is what reaches the receiver. And here is what no law of attraction book bothers to tell you. Stress hormones are not neutral background noise. They are a specific communication. They tell the biological and social systems around you to continue sending threat, because that is what you are calibrated to receive. The nervous system does not distinguish between a threat that is real and a threat that is remembered or imagined. So every time you check your bank account with a knot in your stomach, every time you lie awake running through scenarios of how things could go wrong, every time you brace yourself before a difficult conversation about money, your body sends the signal again. Send more of this. This is what we are tuned to. This is what fits here. The circuit stays incomplete, not because you are not visualizing hard enough. Because the device you are visualizing through is still set to the wrong frequency. There is a woman named Diana who grew up in a household where money was a source of consistent low-level emergency. Not poverty, exactly, the lights stayed on, the food was there, but the conversation around money was always tight, always edged, always slightly fearful. She carried that into her adult life without ever examining it as a thing she was carrying. By 32, she had a good job, a decent salary, and a persistent feeling that none of it was stable enough to relax into. She discovered meditation and manifestation tools in her late 20s and practiced them faithfully. She noticed, after a year, that she would attract opportunities. They would appear, genuinely appear, and then something would happen. A misunderstanding. A timing issue. A deal that got close and then fell apart at the last step. She began to wonder if she was self-sabotaging in some deliberate way she could not locate. She was not sabotaging in a deliberate way. Her body was simply completing the loop it knew. The signal going out from a chronically stressed nervous system does not just affect how you think. It affects what you notice, which opportunities feel trustworthy, which risks feel survivable, which chances you reach for, and which ones you let slide past without even knowing you let them go. The invisible step is not a better visualization technique. The invisible step is getting the device out of the threat state before you try to transmit anything from it. This matters in a way that cannot be talked around. You can read 10 more books about the law of attraction. You can sit in front of your vision board every morning until the images are burned into your memory. You can repeat affirmations until you can say them in your sleep. None of it sends a clean signal through a body that is running on stress chemistry. The technique is not the missing step. The state of the body delivering the technique is the missing step. In a later section, you will come to a point about why positive thinking fails that clashes with the familiar story. And once you see it, the contradiction resolves in a way that completely changes what you actually do each morning. But for now, hold this one fact. Your body is not a passive vessel for your thoughts. It is the transmitter. It is the antenna. It is the device that determines whether your signal reaches anything or dissolves into static before it travels 10 feet. Marcus did not fail because he lacked belief. He failed because he was trying to transmit a clear signal through a body that was set, every single morning, to receive threats. And you cannot broadcast abundance from a body that is braced for loss. The question this chapter now hands to the next one is the most practical question in this entire book. If the state of your body determines the quality of the signal, what does it actually take to change the state? Chapter 5. Gratitude is useless without this first. Gratitude does not work the way you have been told it works. That sounds like an attack on the one practice every self-help book agrees on. Maybe it is, but the problem is not gratitude itself. The problem is that almost everyone is performing gratitude in exactly the wrong order, and the order is everything. You have been handed a beautiful instrument and told to play it, but no one told you to tune it first. A piano that is out of tune does not make music when you press the keys. It makes noise that sounds almost like music, and almost is the cruelest word in the English language. It keeps you trying something that is 90% right while delivering 0% of the result. This chapter is about the 10% nobody mentions. The missing step that sits before gratitude, not after it, not beside it, before it. Once you understand what that step is and why it is not optional, the practice you have already been doing will finally have a foundation strong enough to stand on. Here is what the previous chapter handed you. It said the state of your body determines the quality of the signal. It said the question now is a practical one. What does it actually take to change that state? Sit with that question for a moment. This chapter is going to answer it, but not before it shows you something uncomfortable about the answer you might already be carrying. Most people who practice gratitude are doing something that looks correct from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. They know it feels hollow. They sit down in the morning and list 5 things they are grateful for. Part of them means it. Part of them is thinking about the rent that is 3 days overdue, the text message they have not answered, the way their chest feels like it is made of wet concrete. They write down the words anyway because they were told consistency matters. They were told to do it even when they do not feel it. There is something true in that. But there is also something dangerously incomplete in it that nobody wants to say out loud. Here is the thing. Your nervous system is not listening to your words. It is listening to your body. It is listening to the tension in your shoulders, the shallowness of your breathing, the low-grade hum of alarm that runs through you when you think about money or the future or whether you are falling behind. Your nervous system is one of the oldest systems in the human body. It does not read journals. It reads signals. And if the signal your body is broadcasting is fear, it does not matter how many gratitude sentences you write above it. The fear is louder. The fear is the signal. The words are just words. Go back to the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the big things, just the feeling of a regular Tuesday. The low-level anxiety that passed as normal, the gap between what you wanted and what you had. The way you had gotten so used to living inside that gap that you stopped noticing it was even there. If someone had handed you a gratitude journal on that Tuesday and told you to write down 5 things, what would have happened inside your chest? Would the writing have changed the feeling? Or would the feeling have survived the writing completely intact? For most people, the feeling wins every time. This is not a failure of discipline. It is not a failure of belief. It is a failure of sequence. Imagine a musician named Clara. She is 26, and she has spent 2 years preparing for the most important audition of her career. The morning of the audition, she arrives at the concert hall an hour early. She is anxious in the way only someone who has worked that hard can be anxious, the kind that feels like love and dread at the same time. She sits down at the piano because she wants to do everything right, because she has read every piece of advice she could find. She decides to begin by playing her piece. She tells herself the act of playing will calm her down. It always has before. but the piano has not been tuned in 3 months. The hall is large. The acoustics are unforgiving. She plays the first line, and every note is slightly, unmistakably wrong. Not wrong enough for someone in the back row to name the problem. Wrong enough that Clara can feel it in her hands. The piece she has practiced 10,000 times sounds like a stranger playing her music. She finishes the audition. She thanks the judges. She walks out knowing she gave them almost the performance she had prepared for. What Clara needed was not more practice. She needed someone to tell her to tune the instrument before she played the song. Gratitude is the song. Your nervous system is the instrument. Here is the open loop this chapter is going to ask you to hold. You have been told that gratitude itself will shift your state. That if you feel it hard enough, long enough, consistently enough, the feeling will follow the practice. But what if that is only true above a certain threshold? What if below that threshold, practicing gratitude in a dysregulated body is not just neutral, not just ineffective, but actually reinforcing the very pattern you are trying to leave? That is a hard idea. Stay with it. The word dysregulated sounds clinical, so let me make it concrete. A dysregulated nervous system is not someone having a breakdown. It is someone who woke up tired and immediately checked their phone. Someone who ate breakfast while scrolling bad news. Someone whose body has been living in a low-intensity state of alertness for so long that calm feels unfamiliar and even suspicious. This is not a rare condition. This is Tuesday. This is most mornings for most people in their 20s and early 30s who feel financially behind and cannot quite name why they feel like they are always running slightly late to their own life. When that person sits down to practice gratitude, something specific happens. The brain attempts to generate the feeling of thankfulness. But the body, which has been running a threat detection program since the alarm went off, does not release the chemicals that make gratitude feel real. The words go in. Nothing comes out. And the person, who has been told that consistency is the answer, decides they are simply not trying hard enough and writes one more line in the journal. This is the incomplete circuit. This is the static that hides the signal. Here is what gratitude actually does when it works. When it works, it is not a practice of thinking thankful thoughts. It is a physiological event. Real gratitude, the kind that shifts your state and changes your signal, produces a measurable response in the body. The heart rate settles. The breath deepens without effort. There is a quality of openness in the chest that you do not have to manufacture because the body has already moved into it. That is not poetry. That is what researchers who study heart rhythm coherence describe as a state in which the body and brain are operating in coordination rather than in conflict. And the specific finding, the one that matters for everything you are doing, is this. That state of coherence is a precondition for genuine gratitude, not a result of it. Read that again with your ears. Coherence comes first. Gratitude follows. Not the other way. This is what tuning the instrument means. Before you press the keys, before you write the first line, before you ask your nervous system to feel something it does not yet have access to, you give the instrument a chance to settle into itself. You do not bypass the body. You start there. Now the question you have been holding since the beginning of this chapter can begin to close. You were asked whether practicing gratitude in a dysregulated state might not just be ineffective, but might actually reinforce the pattern. Here is the answer. It is uncomfortable in a useful way. When you repeatedly attempt to feel grateful and fail to feel it genuinely, your brain begins to associate the practice with the hollow feeling rather than the real one. The journal becomes a cue for performance. The performance becomes a reminder that the feeling is not there. And the reminder, repeated daily, quietly confirms the underlying fear that this is not working, that you are doing something wrong, that maybe you are just not the kind of person this works for. You are not broken. You are out of sequence. The invisible step is not complicated. It is not a long process, but it is non-negotiable. It must come before the gratitude every single time without exception. You settle the body first. You create the conditions in which genuine feeling is physiologically possible. And then, from that place, gratitude is not a practice. It is a recognition. You are not manufacturing thankfulness. You are noticing what was already true, once the noise quieted down enough for you to hear it. This is the difference between a transmitter broadcasting static and a transmitter broadcasting a clean signal. The message is the same. The difference is the medium it travels through. Before long, you will come to a point about why visualization fails that clashes with the familiar story. After that really registers, it immediately changes exactly how you use your own mind before bed each night. For now, take the idea of sequence with you. Tune the instrument. Then play the song. The music was always in you. It was always real. But music played on an untuned instrument does not reach the people in the room. You have to get the instrument right first. Chapter 6. The emotion skipped in every script. Something is draining out of your life right now, and it has no dramatic name. It does not announce itself. It moves quietly, the way a slow leak empties a tank, not all at once, but daily, invisibly, with compound interest working against you. Every week you spend trying techniques that almost work is a week your nervous system spends confirming a story, that you are the kind of person who tries things and stays in the same place. That story calcifies. The longer it sits, the more it costs you, not just in results, but in the willingness to try at all. What you are losing is not just time. You are losing the version of yourself who still believes the thing is possible. And here is what nobody in the self-help world will tell you directly. The reason those techniques keep draining out of you is not because you are doing them wrong. It is because one step in the sequence is missing. A step that comes before joy, before gratitude, before visualization. A step so quiet that the entire industry walked right past it. This chapter is about that step. The instrument has to be right first. That was where the last chapter left you, with that single demand, the one that precedes everything else. You cannot coax a broken string into carrying the melody. You cannot expect a tuning fork to hold its pitch when the metal itself is fractured. So before you ask what to feel, before you reach for gratitude or excitement or the particular elevated state that every manifesting script tells you to maintain, you have to ask a prior question. What is the ground you are trying to grow that feeling from? Here is the open loop this chapter is going to hand you right now. There is a name for the emotional state that makes every other positive emotion neurologically accessible. Most people have never heard it used this way. And the absence of it is not just an inconvenience. It is the precise reason your circuit stays incomplete. Hold that question. Let it sit. We will name it, and when we do, something is going to click into place that changes how you read every technique you have ever tried. First, though, you need to understand the ladder. Picture a ladder with 12 rungs. At the top are the states you have been told to reach: joy, excitement, genuine gratitude, the kind of open confidence that draws things toward you. Every book places those at the summit and tells you to climb. What almost no one does is count the rungs. They say, go to the top. They describe the view from the top. They may even tell you what it feels like to stand there. What they skip is the rung count. More specifically, they skip the rung you have to be standing on before any upward movement becomes possible. You cannot jump to rung 12 from rung 2. The muscles do not work that way. Trying to force yourself into joy when your nervous system is sitting in a low, quiet kind of dread is not climbing. It is falling forward and calling it flight. Remember the season you were in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the broad strokes, the specific texture of a regular Tuesday. What it felt like to open your bank account. What happened in your chest when an unexpected bill arrived. Whether at the end of an average week, there was a residue of ease or a residue of held breath. If the honest answer is held breath, then your nervous system at that time, and possibly right now, was not looking for joy. It was scanning for threat. A nervous system scanning for threat cannot fully generate the emotion that attracts. It is occupied. It is already running a different program. That is not a personal failing. That is biology doing its job. The rung you need is called felt safety, not believed safety, not intellectually understood safety. Felt. Registered in the body, not just held as a thought in the mind. Here is the difference, and it matters enormously. You can tell yourself you are safe. You can repeat it. You can write it in a journal every morning. Your rational mind will hear you. But if your body is still braced, shoulders slightly elevated, breath a little shallow, jaw a degree tighter than it needs to be, then the signal your nervous system is broadcasting is not safety. It is alert. And that signal does not carry the frequency you are trying to transmit. Remember the antenna from the first chapter. Static is not silence. Static is active interference. Your body generating a quiet signal of threat, while your mind is trying to generate the signal of ease. That is not a unified transmission. That is two stations broadcasting on the same frequency at the same time. The result is not partial success. The result is a muddy signal that reaches nothing clearly. Marcus worked at a printing company for 6 years. 31 years old, competent at his job, quietly certain that something larger was supposed to happen for him. He had read the books. He had done the visualizations. Every morning for 4 months he sat in his car before going inside and pictured the life he wanted clearly, specifically, with the feeling he had been told to attach to it, the house, the income, the version of himself who moved through the world without the low, constant hum of financial stress. He pictured it with everything he had. At night he would calculate whether his account could absorb a car repair if one came. He would lie still in the dark and run numbers. Not panicking, just checking, just making sure, just bracing, quietly, the way a person braces when they have learned that the floor sometimes gives way without warning. What Marcus was trying to do was reach rung 12 from rung 3. Every morning he would get a handhold on a higher rung. Every night the weight of an unresolved nervous system would pull him back. He was not failing to visualize. He was failing to establish the ground state from which visualization becomes generative rather than theatrical. 4 months of mornings, dissolving each night. The technique was not broken. The ground was. Now here is what changes everything. Felt safety is not the same as having certainty about outcomes. That is what most people get wrong when they first hear this. They think I cannot feel safe until things are actually stable, until the income is there, until the situation changes. But that thinking makes safety a reward for results when safety is actually the precondition for getting them. You feel safe first, not because you are pretending, not because you are lying to your body, but because you actively generate the body state of safety through specific, learnable action. And then, from that ground, the higher emotions become neurologically available. When your nervous system is not occupied with threat scanning, it has resources to give toward generative states. Gratitude becomes available because Gratitude requires a sense that you have something to protect, something to appreciate, and that sense requires a basic undercurrent of safety to rest on. Joy becomes available because joy is an expansion, and you cannot expand when you are braced. Genuine confidence, the kind that does not need to announce itself, requires a body that is not quietly preparing for the worst. Every emotion the books prescribe is built on felt safety as its foundation. Without the foundation, you are stacking on air. Do you see what this means for every technique you have tried? It means the techniques were not wrong. The sequence was incomplete. You were being asked to reach for the fruit before the roots had water. And the cruelest part is that when you try to feel joy from a ground of quiet dread and nothing happens, the conclusion your mind reaches is that you are not good at this, that you lack some quality other people have, that you are somehow immune to the thing that works for everyone else. None of those conclusions are correct. You simply had an incomplete map. Now you have one more section of the map. Here is what the complete sequence looks like. Felt safety first, not performed safety, not told to yourself safety. The body state of safety, cultivated deliberately as the first emotional act of any practice. From safety, ease becomes accessible. From ease, genuine gratitude becomes real rather than recited. From gratitude, elevated expectation becomes something your nervous system can hold without flinching. And from there, only from there, does visualization carry current rather than just imagery. This is not a longer process. It is a correctly ordered one. The felt safety state can be reached in minutes, through breath, through physical placement, through anchoring practices that signal to your brainstem that the threat scan can pause. The how of that is coming, but the what had to land first because you cannot use a tool you have not yet named. Now close the loop you opened at the start of this chapter. There is a name for the emotional state that makes every other positive emotion neurologically accessible. You have heard it now. Felt safety is the ground state from which all generative emotions become available to you. That is the missing step, not a mystical concept, not a new belief to adopt, a body state to establish, a rung to stand on before you reach. The circuit that has been incomplete, the one that keeps your signal mudded, your attempts half-powered, your results inconsistent, it stays open until this rung is in place. Once it is in place, the rest of what you already know begins to conduct. The instrument was right all along. You just needed to tune it from the bottom, not the top. What exactly does it take to generate felt safety when your circumstances have not yet changed? Chapter 7. Why the Universe Ignores Desperate Prayers. Desperation is not a form of focus. It is a form of broadcast. Every prayer you send from a place of desperate need is received by your environment not as a request, but as a report. And the report says that what you are asking for does not yet exist in your life. That sounds like a semantic distinction. It is not. It is the difference between a signal that compels and a signal that repels. Once you understand which one you have been sending, you will understand something most manifestation books will never tell you, because most of them were written to sell you comfort, not truth. Here is the question that will sit under everything in this chapter. If the intensity of your desire should be the fuel of manifestation, why do the people who want things most desperately seem to attract them least? Hold that question. The answer is coming. And when it arrives, it will not be the one you have been given before. Think about Marcus. Marcus was 31, renting a single room in a shared apartment he had outgrown 3 years earlier. He kept a prayer journal, not a casual one. A detailed, specific, fervent journal he wrote in every morning before the sun was fully up. He described the apartment he wanted, the number on his bank balance, the feeling of sitting at a dinner table he owned. He wrote with the kind of precision that self-help books had told him was the key. Specific details, vivid imagery, emotional investment in the outcome. He underlined sentences on particularly hard days, circled amounts, drew rough sketches of floor plans in the margins. And nothing moved, not nothing as in slow progress. Nothing as in the distance between him and those things seemed to widen the harder he focused on them. He doubled his sessions. He added evening entries to match the morning ones. He found new techniques, new scripts, new visualization exercises, and applied them all with the same relentless attention. Months passed. The journal filled. Marcus started a second one. Still, the numbers in his account did not grow the way he drew them in the margins. The room stayed small. The dinner table he imagined remained precisely as imaginary as the day he had first pictured it. What was Marcus broadcasting? That is not a rhetorical question. If you imagine his nervous system as a transmitter, and you remember the antenna from the very first pages of this book, then what frequency was that transmitter running on every single morning while his hand moved across those pages? He was sitting in a room he desperately wanted to leave, writing about a life he desperately needed to reach, from a body that was, in every moment of that writing, generating the physical and chemical signature of someone who does not have what they need. The feeling underneath the words was not faith. The feeling underneath the words was emergency. And emergency is a coherent signal. It is not noise. That is the part people misunderstand. When someone tells you that desperate prayer does not work, you might assume it is because desperation creates mental static that garbles the message. But that is not what happens. The signal is clean. The signal is precise. It broadcasts a single, accurate message to every system inside you that regulates attention, decision, and action. That message is, something necessary is missing. Act as though you are in danger. Prioritize scanning for threats. Filter out opportunities that do not fit the frame of someone in crisis. Your environment does not need to be magical to respond to this. It responds in the most mechanical way possible. When your nervous system is running on the frequency of lack, your perception narrows. Your risk tolerance drops. The phone call you would have made from a place of security feels too bold from a place of fear, so you do not make it. The introduction you would have offered from a place of confidence feels presumptuous from a place of desperation, so you hold back. The opportunities do not disappear. You simply stop being the kind of person who reaches for them, because reaching is not what a person in emergency does. A person in emergency holds tight to what little they have. Now pause here. Think about a time in your own life when you wanted something so badly that wanting it was all you could feel. Not excitement, not anticipation, the specific ache of needing something that was not there. Think about what you were like in those days. How you presented yourself to other people, the decisions you made, whether you moved toward things or waited, contracted, hoped that the thing would somehow find its way to you. Do not rush past this. That version of you was broadcasting a frequency. And now you get to ask whether that frequency was serving what you were trying to build. This is the open wound at the center of the villain belief this book has been naming since the beginning. Visualization alone, positive thinking alone, detailed journaling alone, these techniques are real tools. They are not lies, but they are tools that require a specific internal condition to function. And that condition is the one piece most manifestation books never deliver, because delivering it requires more than telling you to think better thoughts. It requires addressing what your body is signaling beneath the thoughts. Marcus was not failing because he lacked discipline. He was not failing because his visualization was insufficiently detailed. He was failing because every morning, sitting in that small room, the body doing the writing was a body under low-grade emergency. No amount of beautiful language applied on top of that signal could change what the signal was. He was using the right technique on the wrong frequency. Like a transmitter tuned to static trying to broadcast music. The equipment works. The content is real, but nothing lands on the other side. Here is what most people do when this happens. They try harder. They want more fervently. They make the prayer more elaborate, the journaling more frequent, the visualization more emotionally charged. And every single increase in intensity, if it comes from desperation, increases the strength of the signal they do not want to be sending. The intensity of desire without felt safety is the loudest possible signal of absence. Read that again in your own mind. That sentence is the turning point of everything you have been building toward. Intensity without safety does not amplify your request. It amplifies your report. So what does safety feel like when the circumstances have not changed? The previous chapter ended with exactly that question, and it is not a small one. Felt safety is not pretending the problem does not exist. Marcus's bank account was real. The small room was real. The distance between where he was and where he wanted to be was entirely, measurably real. Felt safety is not a delusion that replaces reality. It is a neurological state that allows your system to operate from its higher functions instead of its survival functions. Think of it this way. Two people walk into the same room where the same opportunity sits. The first person enters having spent the morning in desperate prayer, keenly aware of everything they lack, quietly certain this opportunity might be their last chance. The second person enters having spent the morning in ordinary, unremarkable contentment, aware of their goals but not terrorized by them. These two people see the same room. They do not experience the same room. The first person's perception is organized around risk and scarcity. The second person's perception is organized around possibility. Same opportunity, completely different receivers, and the opportunity will respond to them differently. Not because the universe is monitoring their emotional state with judgment, because people respond differently to someone broadcasting emergency than they respond to someone broadcasting security. The first person will communicate differently, ask for different things, present themselves with different energy, and leave a different impression. The mechanism is not mystical. The mechanism is human. And it is so reliable that you have experienced it on both sides without needing anyone to explain it to you. This is the incomplete circuit that has been running underneath every technique you have ever tried. The visualization was real. The desire was real. The effort was real. But the circuit was open. And an open circuit carries no current, no matter how much energy you push through it. The invisible step, the one this entire book is building toward, is the step that closes the circuit. And it begins not with what you think, but with what your body believes about the present moment. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about emotional neutrality and desire that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it immediately changes how you act every single day. For now, stay with Marcus. Because Marcus eventually stopped. Not stopped wanting, but stopped the emergency signal. He did not do it through a dramatic epiphany. He did it through something much smaller and much more repeatable. He did it the same way you close an electrical circuit, not by generating more power, but by making sure both ends are connected. The prayer was never the problem. The signal running beneath the prayer was. And when you change the signal, you do not need to change the prayer. The same words, sent from a body that believes it is already moving towards safety rather than standing still in danger, carry an entirely different charge. What you broadcast when you feel desperate is a picture of your present. What you broadcast when you feel safe is a picture of your future. The question is not how to want more. The question is how to want from the right place. Chapter 8. The 2-minute reset nobody teaches. Something is draining out of you right now. It is not energy. It is not motivation or hope. It is signal. Every time you sit down to visualize, every time you write in your journal or repeat your affirmations, you are attempting to transmit from a broken antenna. The transmission goes nowhere. Not because the technique is wrong, not because you are wrong, but because the body you are transmitting from is running on static, and no amount of mental effort changes that. The cost is not just one failed visualization session. It is months. It is years of sincerely applied effort that produces friction instead of results, and that friction compounds. Every day you practice the technique without first addressing the state, you train yourself to associate the practice with the feeling of nothing working. That association is its own kind of debt. The missing step is not about believing harder. It is about something you can do with your breath in under 2 minutes that changes the physical medium through which everything else travels. That is what this chapter is about. You ended the last chapter standing at the right question. How do you want from the right place? That question sounds philosophical. It sounds like something you think your way into, but the answer is not a thought. The answer is a state. A state is not an idea you hold in your mind. A state is a condition your body is running in right now, as you listen to this, whether you are aware of it or not. Here is what most people do not know about the body's role in this. Your nervous system operates in 2 primary modes. In the first mode, it is scanning for threat. Not necessarily a lion in the grass, just unpaid bills, a conversation that did not go well, a number in your bank account that is lower than you need it to be. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a financial one. It responds to both by tensing, by narrowing focus, by flooding the system with chemicals designed to help you survive. That response is not a character flaw. It is biology doing exactly what biology is supposed to do. But it means that when you sit down to visualize the life you want, your body is often still running the survival program. And the survival program does not trust abundance. It cannot. Trust is not its function. Vigilance is. Think about this for a moment. You have spent real time practicing. You have visualized. You have written down what you want. You have said the words and felt the feelings or tried to. And still something feels blocked, like you are pressing hard against a door that does not open. What if the door is not locked from the outside? What if the state you are in when you practice is itself the obstruction? Hold that question. Because first, you need to meet a woman named Dara. Dara worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company in a city she had moved to at 24 with ambition and a plan. By 29, the plan had not materialized. The income was steady but not growing. The apartment was fine but not where she wanted to be. She was not in crisis, which almost made it worse. She could not point to a single catastrophic reason for the gap between where she was and where she had expected to be. She had read the books. She had done the visualizations. Every morning before work, for nearly 8 months, she sat with her journal and wrote out her goals in vivid detail, present tense, first person, the way every book told her to. And every morning, something subtle happened that she had never named until she told me about it. She said, By the time I get to writing, my shoulders are already up near my ears. I am already thinking about the commute. I am already checking the time. She did not know she was practicing from inside the static. She thought the practice was the whole thing. It was not. Dara is not unusual. She is you. She is almost everyone who has ever taken manifestation seriously and wondered why it seems to work for some people and not for them. The difference is not belief. The difference is state. Here is the open truth that nervous system research has been pointing to for decades. There is a measurable physical condition the body can enter. One where the heart rhythm, the breath pattern, and the electrical activity of the brain all move into coherence. Not just calm, coherence. It is a different thing. Calm is an absence of noise. Coherence is a positive signal. When the body is in coherence, the heart is sending organized electrical information up through the vagus nerve to the brain. The brain, receiving organized input, can access higher-order thinking, not survival, not threat scanning, genuine creative function, the kind that allows a visualization to feel real and embodied rather than flat and effortful. This is the missing step, not a belief, a state, a physical state achieved through a specific physical practice. It takes under 2 minutes. Look back at your actual circumstances in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory, not the broad strokes. The specific texture of a day, what your mornings felt like, what you told yourself was the reason things were not clicking. Did any version of yourself in any of those mornings know how to deliberately shift the physical state of your nervous system before doing any practice at all? Most people never learned this. It was never in the books. It was never on the podcasts. And so the circuit stayed incomplete, the signal stayed scrambled, and the work stayed sincere but disconnected. The practice itself is simple enough that your first reaction may be to dismiss it. Do not dismiss it. Simplicity is not the same as weakness. This practice works because it operates on a mechanism that does not care about your opinion of it. It works on breath-paced heart rhythm, and it works every time you do it correctly. Here is how it goes. You sit down. You do not need silence, though silence helps. You do not need a specific posture, though upright is better than collapsed. You place your attention on the center of your chest, not your head, not the thought you were just having, the center of your chest. You breathe in through your nose for a count of 5, slow and deliberate as if the breath is filling a jar from the bottom up. Then you breathe out for a count of 5. Same pace, same deliberateness, no pause between. In for 5, out for 5. You do this for 2 minutes, which is approximately 12 breath cycles. While you breathe, you hold a single clear feeling in your chest, not a picture, not a word, a feeling. Something that already exists in your life and is already real. Gratitude for something specific. The quiet satisfaction of a moment you already lived. The warmth of something you already have. You are not manufacturing a feeling about the future. You are accessing a feeling from the present or the past, something that is already true, and you are breathing it into the chest while the rhythm does its work. That is it. 2 minutes. 12 breath cycles, 1 real feeling, no visualization yet, no affirmation yet. You are not trying to attract anything in this step. You are tuning the antenna. Now, why does this work? Because the heart's electrical field changes measurably under breath pacing. When the gap between beats becomes rhythmically consistent, something called heart rate variability enters a coherent pattern. That pattern sends a different message up to the brain. The brain exits the threat scanning mode. Not all the way, not permanently, but enough. Enough for the visualization that follows to be received differently by the same nervous system that was running static 60 seconds before. The circuit, which has been incomplete every time you skip this step, finally closes. This is not metaphor. The circuit in question is a physical one, and incomplete circuits do not transmit. Now the open loop closes. Remember the question you were holding, about why the door feels locked from the inside. That is what you have been sensing. Not failure of belief, not lack of deserving. The door is your own nervous system in survival mode, and it has been locked every time you tried to push through it with willpower and visualization alone. The 2-minute reset is the key, not a magical key, a physiological one. It works the same way a warm-up works before a race. You would not sprint from a full stop and wonder why your muscles seized. You have been doing the equivalent of that every time you opened your journal without first addressing your state. Dara learned this. She changed one thing. Before she wrote a single word in her journal, she spent 2 minutes breathing in the 5-count pattern, holding the feeling of a moment she already loved. A specific memory of a Sunday afternoon when everything felt right for no particular reason. Just quiet and right. 3 weeks in, she noticed something strange. The writing came easier. The pictures in her mind felt more vivid and less forced. She said it felt like the difference between speaking into a working microphone and shouting into a room full of noise. The words were the same. The medium had changed. The medium. That is the word that matters here. You can have the most precisely worded affirmation ever written. You can hold the clearest mental image of what you want. But if the medium, meaning your body's physical broadcast state, is running incoherence, the signal fragments before it leaves you. This is why 2 people can do the identical practice and get wildly different results. One of them is transmitting from coherence. The other is transmitting from static. The technique looks the same from the outside. The mechanism is completely different. A little later, we turn toward an argument about emotion's role in manifestation that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it immediately changes exactly how and when you choose to feel. For now, carry this one thing forward. The missing step is not a belief you adopt. It is a state you enter. And entering it takes less time than brewing a cup of coffee, less effort than writing a single paragraph in a journal, and less skill than you imagine. It only asks that you do it first. Before the technique, every single time, not instead of the work, before the work. The practice is the doorway. Everything else is what waits on the other side. What do you find when the signal finally clears? Chapter 9. Identity leaks are draining your signal. Clarity is not the reward for good visualization. It is what you find when you stop doing the things that create noise. That sounds like it lets the hard techniques off the hook. It does not. It points at something more demanding than any technique, your behavior on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when nobody is watching and nothing feels particularly significant. That is precisely when the leak happens. Think about what it means to clear a signal. You spend time each morning in focused intention. You write the goal down. You feel it or you try to, and then you step into the day. Within the first hour, you make a small choice that belongs to someone who does not yet have what you are trying to create, not a dramatic failure, not a collapse of faith. Just a small, quiet behavioral leak, then another one, then another. By evening, you have drained more signal than the morning's work ever produced. That is the invisible step most books walk right past, and that is exactly where this chapter begins. Here is the question that will guide everything you read in the next few minutes. If your behaviors are broadcasting who you are more loudly than your thoughts, what exactly are your behaviors saying right now? Hold that question. The answer comes, but not yet. Imagine a pipe carrying water from a clean underground source to a house. The source is pure. The pressure is adequate. Everything at the origin point is working. But somewhere along the 100 feet of pipe between the source and the faucet, there are 3 small cracks, not breaks, not ruptures. Just hairline fractures in the joint seams. Each one loses only a trickle. None of them individually would make a homeowner panic. But by the time the water reaches the faucet, the pressure is gone. What pours out is weak, inconsistent, barely enough for what the house needs. And the person at the faucet has no idea why, because they cannot see the pipe. That pipe is your identity signal. The source is real. The intention you set in the quiet of the morning is genuine. But between that intention and the world you are trying to build, there are leaks, small behavioral cracks that bleed the pressure out before it ever arrives. And here is what makes this difficult to see. The leaks do not feel like leaks. They feel like normal life. They feel like being practical, being realistic, being responsible. They feel like just getting through the day. You already know the kind of behaviors that make the big motivational lists. Stop spending on things you do not need. Stop saying yes to work you resent. Stop surrounding yourself with people who drain you. Those are real, but they are not where the most persistent leaks live. The deepest leaks are smaller than that. They happen in the space between your stated identity and your automatic behavior. Here is what a real identity leak looks like in actual daily life. You have decided, with full sincerity, that you are someone who manages money with intention. That is the new self you are building the signal toward. And then 3 times this week, you avoid opening your banking app because some part of you would rather not see the number. Not because you are broke, not because anything is catastrophic, just because looking at it creates a low hum of discomfort, and scrolling past that discomfort feels easier in the moment. That avoidance is a leak. The person you are intending to become does not flinch at their own numbers. The behavior says the old self is still running the house. Or this. You are building something, a business, a side income, a creative project. Every morning you affirm that you are someone who produces, who shows up, who does the work. And then you sit down at your desk and spend the first 40 minutes consuming content about people who have already built what you are trying to build. Not research, not learning, watching, feeling a complicated mix of inspiration and quiet inadequacy. Then finally starting your own work once the emotional weight of comparison has settled in. The consumption is a leak. The person you are trying to become produces before they consume. The sequence matters. The sequence broadcasts who you currently are. Or this one, and this one cuts deep. You talk about what you are building in the conditional tense. When this works out, if this comes together, once things settle down. Every time you describe your goal using language that assigns it to a future that may or may not arrive, you are broadcasting doubt under the surface of hope. The person who already has the outcome does not speak about it conditionally. They speak about the work in present tense and the outcome as inevitable. Language is not just decoration. Language is a behavior, and that behavior has a leak in it. 3 small cracks, none dramatic. Each one on its own, barely visible. Together they explain why the faucet runs weak. Now consider a woman named Claudia. She was 31, working in a company she neither loved nor hated, and she had spent 2 years genuinely invested in the idea that she could build an independent income through her design work. She meditated. She journaled. She had a vision board that she actually looked at. She did everything the books told her, and nothing moved. Not backward, not forward, just flat. A mentor she trusted asked her one simple question. He said, "Describe for me a typical workday from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep and leave nothing out." She described it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said just one thing. He said, "I can hear 2 different people in that description, and they are fighting each other for control of every hour. Claudia went home and looked at the day again, this time not as a series of tasks, but as a series of votes. Each behavior was a vote for one identity or the other. And when she counted them honestly, the old self was winning, not because she was lazy or uncommitted, because she had never connected the concept of signal to the concept of behavior. She thought signal was something you set in meditation and then carried with you. She had no idea you were resetting it constantly, all day long, with every small choice. She changed 3 behaviors. Only 3. She chose them specifically because they most directly contradicted her stated identity. She opened her financial tracking app every morning before she opened anything else. She produced 1 hour of her own work before consuming anything created by someone else. And she stopped using conditional language to describe her business in conversation. She replaced it with present-tense language about the work itself. 4 months later, something shifted. Not because the universe finally heard her, because she had finally stopped drowning her own signal in behavioral noise. Here is the principle underneath that story. You are always in the process of proving something to the deepest part of yourself. Not convincing, proving. The conscious mind can be convinced by an affirmation. The deeper operating system requires behavioral evidence. And when the evidence conflicts with the intention, the operating system logs the behavior, not the intention. You cannot think your way past this. You cannot visualize over it. The missing step is closing the gap between the identity you are claiming and the identity your actions are demonstrating. This is what coherence means in the context of signal, not consistency of mood, not absence of doubt. Coherence is the alignment between what you say you are and what your daily behaviors quietly confirm. When those 2 things match, the signal runs clean. When they contradict each other, you get static. And the static is not random interference from the outside world. The static is self-generated. You are both the transmitter and the source of the noise. Return to your actual circumstances in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the big circumstances, the job, the account balance, the city. Think about the small daily behaviors. How you spent the first 30 minutes of your morning. What you did when discomfort appeared. What you said out loud about your goals and how you said it. How much of that behavior belonged to the version of you who had the thing you wanted, and how much belonged to the version who was still waiting to see if it would happen. Be honest. That gap between those 2 profiles, that is where your leaks were living. Now bring that question into this week. Further on, we turn toward an argument about action and results that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it changes exactly how you decide which behaviors to change first. But for now, stay with this. The gap is not between your desire and your worthiness. The gap is not between your work and your luck. The gap is between the identity you are declaring and the identity your behavior is broadcasting on every channel that actually matters. Your behavior is your loudest signal. Every choice you make in the ordinary hours of an ordinary day is either confirming the new self or quietly re-electing the old one. Plug the leak. Not all of them at once. That is how people overwhelm themselves into inaction. Choose one behavior this week, just one that clearly belongs to the old self, one that directly contradicts the person you are building toward. Replace it with the behavior that person would naturally do. Do not announce it. Do not make it a ritual. Just do it repeatedly until it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like fact. That is when the operating system updates. That is when the behavioral proof begins to accumulate. That is when the signal, finally, starts to run with pressure behind it. The source was never the problem. What are you leaking? Chapter 10. Visualization works backwards for most people. Something is draining out of you right now. Not money, not time, something more foundational than either of those. Every time you sit down to visualize the life you want, and every time you feel the quiet deflation afterward, you lose a little more of the one resource that actually drives results. Your belief that the gap between where you stand and where you want to be is closable. That gap is not closing. It is widening. And it is widening in direct proportion to how faithfully you practice the most recommended tool in every self-help book you have ever read. Visualization. The technique is real. The results should be real. So why does picturing your dream life leave you feeling further away from it than when you started? That is not a small question. That is the question this chapter exists to answer. And the answer will reframe everything you thought you understood about how this tool works. That question has been sitting in the background since the very first page of this book. Hold it close. You will have your answer before this chapter ends. You already know what it feels like to leak energy. The previous chapter asked you to name yours. Maybe you identified a story you keep rehearsing, a fear you keep feeding, a low-grade hum of doubt that runs underneath everything you do. Leaking is what happens when the circuit is incomplete. And the most ironic place that leak shows up, the place almost nobody talks about, is inside your visualization practice itself. Here is what the standard advice tells you to do. Picture your future. Make it vivid. See the house, the number in the account, the face in the mirror that belongs to a person who has already arrived. Feel it as if it is real. Then release it. That is the formula. It is in every book. It is in every course. It is repeated so often it has become invisible, like wallpaper in a room you have lived in too long to notice anymore. And here is what actually happens inside your nervous system when you do it. Your brain is a comparison engine. It does not experience images in isolation. It experiences them in relation to something. So when you picture a future version of yourself standing in a larger apartment, driving a cleaner car, holding a business that runs without your constant panic, your brain does not simply enjoy the image. It immediately calculates the distance between that image and the sensory data streaming in from your actual present moment. The hum of your current apartment, the tension in your shoulders, the balance notification you swiped away this morning without looking at. Your brain registers all of it, compares it to the picture, and files a single verdict. Not there yet. That verdict is not a thought. It is a felt sense. And a felt sense is a signal. The signal travels. It lands in the body as a low, dull ache, the specific flavor of wanting something you do not have. And wanting something you do not have is the opposite of the state that produces results. It is the state that produces more wanting. Picture your actual circumstances in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not as a story, but as a sensation. Where were you sitting? What were you reaching for that you did not have yet? Did you visualize then? Did you feel the gap then? And if you did, if you practiced, if you pictured, if you tried, why is the gap still the texture of your days? That is not an accusation. That is an invitation to look honestly at what the technique was actually doing to your signal. Meet Marcus. Marcus was 31, worked in logistics coordination for a mid-size freight company, and had been practicing visualization every morning for 2 years. He had a notebook. He had a vision board made from a piece of cardboard and some magazine cutouts, tucked behind his bedroom door. He had a routine. He woke before his alarm, made coffee, sat in the same chair by the window, and spent 15 minutes every morning picturing the version of his life he was trying to reach. The consulting practice he wanted to build, the office with the frosted glass door, The moment he would tell his logistics manager he was done, 2 years, every morning, no movement, what Marcus noticed but could not name was that the 15 minutes left him feeling hollow, not hopeless exactly, not defeated, just empty in a particular way, like a room where a party was supposed to happen and nobody came. He kept thinking the solution was to make the visualization more vivid, more detail, more feeling. So he added more. He started narrating the images in his head. He recorded voice memos to himself describing the consulting practice in present tense. He read them back every evening. The hollowness deepened. One afternoon Marcus sat down with a different intention. He was not trying to visualize anything. He was not trying to feel anything specific. He had hit a kind of exhausted neutral. He sat in the chair, set the coffee down, and for 12 minutes did nothing except breathe and notice what was already in his body, not reaching forward, not projecting outward. Just landing in the room he was actually in the body he was actually wearing, letting himself be fully present inside the ordinary Tuesday of his life. Something shifted, not dramatically. He did not suddenly see his future with crystal clarity, but when he got up from that chair, he felt like someone who was capable of doing something, not someone who was waiting for his life to start. That afternoon, he sent an email he had been drafting and deleting for 4 months. The response came back in 6 hours. It became his first consulting client. Marcus had not found a new technique. He had stumbled into a different state, and the state made the action possible. What Marcus discovered by accident, neuroscience has been building a case for deliberately. There is a meaningful distinction between projecting into a future image and inhabiting a present state. When you project into the future, you activate the part of your brain responsible for anticipation and simulation. That part is useful, but it is not the part that makes you act. When you inhabit a present state, when you embody a quality now, rather than imagining it later, you activate something different. The felt sense of capacity. The sensation of being someone who can. That is a different circuit entirely. The incomplete circuit in standard visualization is this. The image is future tense, but action always happens in the present tense. So when the gap between the image and the present moment is what you feel most, action stalls. The signal is all static. Nothing gets transmitted. Here is what changes everything. Embodiment is not about picturing yourself in a future scenario. It is about locating a real quality, steadiness, clarity, decisiveness, ease, and inhabiting it right now in the body you are sitting in the room you are currently in. Not because your circumstances have changed, because the quality itself is not something that lives in a future circumstance. It is something that lives in a nervous system. Yours, right now, already accessible. Do you feel that difference? The image is out there. The state is in here. Most people visualize from the outside. They see a scene, a picture, a movie of themselves that they are watching from a seat in the audience. The neuroscientists call this third-person visualization, and there is a time when it is useful for planning, for motivation, for keeping a goal alive. But for creating the felt signal that actually drives behavior, first-person presence is what changes the body's output. Not seeing yourself succeeding, being the person who is already grounded in the quality that produces success. Not imagining confidence in a future boardroom. Sitting in your current chair and locating the sensation of confidence already present in your chest. That is the missing step. And it is missing from almost every visualization script, every vision board instruction, every morning routine that tells you to picture your future self, as if the picture alone completes the circuit. It does not. The picture is an antenna pointed at the wrong frequency. It transmits wanting instead of having. distance instead of readiness. And distance is a signal too. It goes out. The world responds to it. Soon we turn toward an argument about the role of emotion in manifestation that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it changes how you act. For now, stay with the question of state, not future state, present state. The quality that you are waiting for permission to feel. Whose permission are you waiting for? The clarity, the steadiness, the sense that you belong in the life you are building. None of that requires the life to arrive first. It is available now. It has always been available now. The technique of visualization has been pointing your attention outward and forward, when the thing that completes the circuit lives inward and present. Marcus did not visualize his way to that first client. He stopped performing arrival and started practicing presence. One morning, one email, one response. The open loop closes here. Why does visualization leave so many people feeling further from their goals? Because most people are visualizing from inside a state of lack. The signal they are transmitting is the feeling of not having, dressed up in the clothes of having. The image is positive. The signal underneath it is not. And the signal is what travels. The circuit completes when the state is real, not imagined, not projected, present, felt, and inhabiting your actual body in your actual now. Stop seeing your future. Start being your readiness. Chapter 11. Action from the right state changes everything. Trying harder does not produce better results. That sounds like an excuse made by people who quit too soon. It is not. It is one of the most precise observations you can make about how action actually functions. The quality of every action you take is determined not by how much force you apply, but by the internal state from which you take it. Here is the tension that most people never stop to feel. You have been told your whole life that effort is the variable. Work more hours, push through discomfort, grind past exhaustion. And yes, movement matters. No one in this book will suggest that sitting still while picturing your bank account produces income. But there is a category of action that returns results completely out of proportion to its apparent effort. And there is a category that consumes enormous energy and returns almost nothing. The difference between those two categories is not timing or strategy or luck. It is state. This chapter will show you exactly what that difference looks like in practice. Once you see it in the story of Marcus, you will never be able to unsee it in your own behavior. Think about the last time you sent a desperate email. Maybe it was to a potential client, a landlord, or someone you wanted to impress. You spent 40 minutes writing it. You checked the wording 6 times. You hit send and then refreshed your inbox every 12 minutes for 2 days. Now think about what that email actually communicated underneath the words. That is the open circuit, the one this whole book has been working toward closing. Marcus had been freelancing as a graphic designer for 3 years by the time he was 26. He was good at his work, not transcendent but genuinely good. The kind of good that should produce a livable income with reasonable consistency, except it did not. He landed clients, completed the work, received payment, and then found himself back at zero, refreshing job boards at 11 at night, a tightness behind his sternum that had become so constant he forgot it was there. He had tried visualizing. He had tried affirmations. He had created a vision board that still hung crooked on his bedroom wall, slightly embarrassing him every morning. None of it produced what he needed. Not magic. Simply more clients. He could not figure out what he was doing wrong. One Tuesday morning, after a better night of sleep than usual, Marcus woke up and felt something different. Not happiness exactly. More like a temporary absence of urgency. He had $20 in his checking account and a bill due in 8 days. The circumstances had not changed. But for whatever reason, the sleep, the weather, something his body decided on its own, his nervous system was quiet. He opened his laptop. He was going to send the same type of outreach email he had sent dozens of times before. Same offer, roughly the same words, same industry contacts. But he wrote it differently. Not deliberately, not because he followed a formula. He wrote it from the feeling of quiet already in him. He was not asking. He was offering. He was not trying to close a deal. He was describing something he genuinely believed would help the person reading it. He hit send in 11 minutes without checking it 6 times. 3 hours later, that person replied. Within a week, 2 more replies came from forwarded versions of the same note. One of those became a client whose single project paid more than Marcus had made in the previous 2 months combined. Now wait. Do not reach for the explanation yet. Sit with the story for a moment. The immediate instinct is to say Marcus got lucky, or the email was just better written, or the timing happened to align. Those explanations feel satisfying because they keep the world orderly. They mean the story is about an external event rather than an internal one. But the question worth asking is this. What changed between the hundreds of emails Marcus had sent before that Tuesday and the one he sent from stillness? The words were similar. The recipient pool was similar. The offer was the same. What changed was the signal behind the words. This is what coherent state action actually means. When you take action from a place of internal alignment, when your nervous system is not screaming emergency, when you are not grasping because you believe the outcome will determine your worth, the action itself carries a different quality. People feel it, not mystically, not because of some invisible energy exchange. They feel it because every piece of communication you produce, whether an email or a conversation or a handshake, contains cues about your internal state. Desperation has a texture. Groundedness has one too. Here is the counterintuitive center of this. Inspired action is not necessarily dramatic action. It is not the grand gesture or the courageous leap. Most of the time, it is the ordinary action, the email, the phone call, the conversation, taken from an extraordinary internal position. The same behavior executed from 2 different states produces 2 measurably different outcomes. You have experienced this yourself. Think about a time when you walked into a room not needing anything from the people in it, just present, just yourself. Something clicked with almost no effort. Think about a conversation that felt effortless, a connection that formed before you were even trying to form one. Now compare that to a situation where you walked in tightly wound, calculating, performing confidence rather than operating from it. That is the difference, not willpower. Not strategy, state. The incomplete circuit this book keeps returning to is exactly this gap. You can visualize the outcome, you can take the action, but if the action comes from static, from the anxious hum of someone who needs the result to happen in order to feel okay, the circuit does not close. The signal is corrupted before it leaves you. Anxious hustle is not the same thing as inspired action. They can look identical from the outside. The hours logged might be the same. The tasks might be identical. But anxious hustle is running from something. Inspired action is moving toward something. That distinction shows up in every micro-decision you make along the way, which email you choose to send, which phrase you use, which opportunity you notice because you are present enough to see it rather than too wired to register anything outside your own fear. Here is a question worth sitting with. How much of your recent effort has come from a place of quiet conviction, and how much has come from a place of low-level panic that you have learned to call motivation? Be honest, not as self-punishment, as information. If most of your recent action has been driven by fear of staying stuck, and for many people in their 20s and early 30s, it has been because the pressure is real and the comparisons are constant and the cost of standing still feels visible every day, then you have been producing action, but not necessarily the kind that produces the results you actually want. You have been moving, but moving through static. This is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to do something before you move. The sequence matters. Every other book about action skips a step. The step is this: establish the state first, not the visualization, not the affirmation. The actual felt experience in your body of someone operating from sufficiency rather than scarcity, from readiness rather than desperation. And then, from inside that state, take the action. It does not need to be long. 5 minutes of deliberate return to your own quiet signal before you write the email, before you make the call, before you walk into the meeting. You are not manufacturing false positivity. You are not pretending the stakes are low. You are choosing to access the version of yourself that is not controlled by the noise. Because that version makes better decisions, sends clearer signals, and notices opportunities that the panicked version walks past entirely. Later on, we turn toward an argument about persistence that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it changes how you measure your own progress. For now, stay with Marcus. Because the part of his story that most people miss is not the successful email. It is what happened to his career over the following months. He did not become a different person. He did not develop a new strategy. He began noticing, through trial and error and gradually accumulated self-awareness, the difference in quality between actions taken from his grounded state and actions taken from panic. He began treating state as a precondition, not a reward. Most people treat feeling good as something they will do once the results arrive. Marcus reversed it. Results became more consistent, not because luck smiled on him, because his actions started carrying the right signal. Travel back to that earlier point and stay concrete in your relationship to work and money. Think about the actions you took then, the applications, the pitches, the conversations. Now think about what proportion of those actions were taken from a clear internal state versus a contracted, afraid, I need this to work state. And then think about which ones actually led somewhere. Not all of them, but notice the pattern. Notice which actions had that particular quality of unforced movement. Notice how differently those turned out. The missing step does not replace action. This was never about doing less. It was never about waiting in stillness for the universe to deliver a check to your door. The missing step changes the quality and trajectory of every action you take. It changes what you notice. It changes how you are received. It changes the decisions you make inside the process. The ones that happen too fast to be strategic, but not too fast to be influenced by state. You have already been taking action. You have already been putting in effort. The circuit was just incomplete. One step before the action was missing. And that one step was not technique. It was not a better morning routine or a more disciplined schedule. It was you arriving first. What kind of signal have you been sending, and do you know how to send a different one? Chapter 12. Stop being a student of attraction. Every civilization that has ever risen from the earth has produced a version of the same person. Across centuries, across cultures, across languages that have no words in common, there appears this particular figure, the one who seeks. The seeker is honored. The seeker is celebrated. In stories passed down through generations, the seeker sets out on the great journey to find the sacred thing, and for a time, the seeking itself feels like the purpose. But there is a tension buried in every one of those old stories that most people never notice. The seeker who keeps seeking past the moment of discovery does not become a hero. The seeker who refuses to stop becomes something else entirely, something sadder. You have been asking the right questions for long enough now. The answers have been arriving. This chapter is not about finding one more piece of information. This chapter is about what happens when you finally decide you are done looking. That question at the end of the last chapter was not rhetorical. What kind of signal have you been sending, and do you know how to send a different one? Most people who reach that question pause on it for a moment, feel something stir, and then go looking for another book, another video, another framework that might explain the signal more clearly. That impulse is the pattern this chapter is here to interrupt. Here is the open loop you need to sit with for a while. There is a specific moment, a precise interior shift, that separates the people who use these principles from the people who study them. It is not a technique. It is not a visualization practice or a new journaling format. It arrives in a moment you cannot schedule. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly what that moment feels like. More importantly, you will know whether it has already happened for you, or whether you have been circling just outside of it for months or years. Revisit your actual circumstances in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not in your career necessarily, not your bank account number, just your inner life around this material. Were you already reading books like this one? Were you already watching videos, already taking notes, already feeling that particular blend of excitement and frustration that comes from almost understanding something? If the answer is yes, then here is the uncomfortable thing that needs to be said plainly. 3 years of seeking the same insight means the insight was never the missing piece. You had the insight. You had it early. The gap between where you were 3 years ago and where you are now is not an information gap. It is an identity gap. There is a version of you that learned about visualization and frequency and the incomplete circuit between thought and result. That version of you filed all of it under the category of things I am still learning. That category is a trap, not because learning is wrong, but because the student identity has a specific and devastating side effect. Students wait for permission to apply what they know. Students defer to the material. Students believe there is always one more lesson before they are ready to actually transmit. Take a woman named Renata. She spent 4 years in what she called her growth phase. She read voraciously, attended weekend seminars, filled journals with insights that genuinely moved her. She could explain the mechanics of manifestation clearly to anyone who asked. She used the right words. She felt the right feelings during her morning practice, but her life stayed narrow. Her income was the same. Her relationships circled the same patterns. When a friend finally said to her, "Renata, you know more about this than almost anyone I have met. Why are you still acting like a beginner?" the question landed like a stone. She did not have an answer. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think I have been using the learning to avoid the deciding." That one sentence changed the trajectory of the next year of her life faster than any book she had read in the previous 4. Renata's story is not unusual. It is the default pattern for anyone drawn to this material who has not yet made a particular decision. The decision is not about positive thinking. It is not about believing harder or feeling more grateful. The decision is about identity. Specifically, it is the decision to stop being someone who is absorbing the process and to become someone who is running it, fully, without waiting for more evidence that it works, without one more course to finish first. Here is the principle that sits at the center of this chapter. The missing step was never more information. It was the decision to stop consuming and start transmitting. Read that again in your own mind, not as an inspiring quote, as a direct indictment of a very specific habit you may have been carrying for years. The static you have been hearing, the feeling that the circuit is incomplete, that your visualizations go out but nothing coherent comes back, that static is not caused by a lack of technique. Static is what happens when a transmitter is not fully committed to its own signal. A transmitter that is still searching for the right frequency cannot send a clean signal. It sends a confused one. Confused signals do not produce clear results. They produce partial results, near misses, promising starts that fade, and the gnawing sense that you are almost there but can never quite close the distance. The radio antenna introduced at the very beginning of this book was broken in a specific way, not because the antenna was poorly built, not because the signal was weak. The antenna was broken because the person operating it kept adjusting the dial. Keep adjusting and you never lock in. Lock in and the signal goes somewhere. Your old seeker identity is the hand on the dial. This is the moment you either hear that as a liberating truth, or you feel a flash of defensiveness, followed by the urge to find a different book that might explain it more gently. Both responses are information. The defensiveness, if it came, is worth noticing without judgment. It is simply the old identity protecting itself, the way any structure protects itself when something threatens to replace it. You do not need a gentler explanation. You need a clearer commitment. So here is the mirror moment this chapter requires. Sit with this question honestly, not as a meditation exercise, but as a direct self-assessment. How much of your engagement with this material has been genuine application, and how much has been sophisticated avoidance dressed up as preparation? There is no shame in the answer, but there is cost. The cost is measured in the months and years that pass, while the life you have been visualizing waits on the other side of a decision you keep deferring. The specific interior shift, the one the open loop promised you earlier, is this. At some point, the person who eventually uses these principles stops asking whether they understand them well enough. They start asking only one question. What does the person who already has this result actually do today? Not someday. Not when they feel more ready. Today. That question is not a student's question. A student asks what more they need to learn. A producer asks what someone already successful does on a Tuesday morning when motivation is low and the result is not yet visible. The moment you start asking that second question, and then doing the answer without waiting for certainty, the seeker identity begins to dissolve. Something else takes its place. Something less comfortable in the short term and far more powerful over time. This is not permission to stop learning. Learning is not the enemy. Hiding inside learning is the enemy. There is a difference between the person who reads a chapter and immediately asks how they can run this principle today, and the person who reads the same chapter and thinks, "That was insightful, let me find the next one." One of those people is building. The other is collecting. You have been collecting long enough. The next chapter will give you something you are not fully expecting. It will return to the antenna and show you what a fully tuned transmitter actually looks like in practice. Not as a metaphor, but as a set of concrete behaviors you can recognize and replicate. But none of that matters if you arrive there still wearing the seeker identity. The transmission only works when the person behind it has decided they are no longer waiting. Decide before you turn the page. The student studies the signal. The transmitter becomes it. Chapter 13. Your antenna is already the right size. You have been doing the work. That is the part nobody wants to say out loud because it complicates the story. You have visualized. You have written the lists, said the affirmations, held the feeling as long as you could hold it, and then waited. And something came sometimes. A little. Enough to keep you going, but not enough to make you certain. Not enough to stop the quiet, persistent suspicion that maybe you are the problem. Maybe your desire is too big. Maybe your past is too heavy. Maybe something inside you is simply wired wrong. You have read 12 chapters of this book looking for the missing step. You have found pieces of it. You have felt the outline of something real. But here is what this chapter is going to ask you to sit with before it gives you anything else. What if the problem was never the size of your antenna? What if the problem was always only the frequency you were broadcasting on? That question has an answer, and the answer is going to feel like relief and responsibility at the same time. Remember Marcus. You met him early in this book. He was a man who spent 3 years doing everything right and getting results that felt like a radio tuned one station off, close enough to hear something, too much static to make it out. He visualized the office, the income, the specific number in his account. He repeated the process. He believed most days, and still the signal came through broken and partial. Like a conversation through a wall. Marcus was not broken. His antenna was not too small. The frequency was off by a fraction, and a fraction is everything. That is where we left him. Here is where the story ends. Marcus stopped trying to want harder. That was the shift. He had spent 3 years increasing the voltage of his desire, pouring more emotion into the same transmission, and getting the same incomplete result. Then one afternoon he sat down and asked himself a single question. He wrote it on the back of a receipt because he had no paper. The question was, what does a person who already has this actually do on a Tuesday? Not how do they feel. What do they do? He wrote down 6 things. Then he did one of them. Not because he thought it would work, because it was coherent with the version of himself he was trying to become. 3 weeks later, a conversation opened that had been closed for 2 years. 6 months after that, the number in his account looked like the one he had been visualizing. The antenna had not changed. The frequency had. Now sit with that for a moment before moving on. There is a difference between sending a signal and sending a coherent signal. A radio tower can broadcast at full power and still reach nobody if the frequency is scattered. Strength is not the variable. Coherence is. And here is the thing about coherence that most books on this subject quietly skip over. It is not a feeling. It is not how convinced you are. It is not the intensity of your belief on a good morning. Coherence is the alignment between what you say you want, what you decide each day, and what your body does when nobody is watching. All 3 have to run on the same frequency. When one of them drifts, the signal breaks. Call up your actual circumstances in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the goals you had or the mood you were in. Think about what your days actually looked like. What you did with the first hour. What you said yes to when you wanted to say no. What you spent your attention on when you had a free moment. Now think about what you want today. The specific thing you have been reaching toward. Ask yourself honestly. Does the daily shape of your life transmit that thing? Or does it transmit something older, something more comfortable, something you chose before you knew you wanted more? That gap is not a flaw. It is a calibration problem. Here is the open loop this chapter planted at the start. You wondered whether you were the problem, whether your capacity was smaller than your desire. The answer is no. Your capacity to receive has never been the limiting factor. Capacity is structural. It does not break. What breaks, or rather what drifts, is coherence. And coherence can be corrected. That is the difference between a character flaw and a tuning error. You do not fix a tuning error by becoming a different person. You fix it by adjusting the dial. The invisible step that every technique skips is this. Visualization sets the destination. Emotion charges the signal, but coherence is what actually broadcasts it. Coherence is your actions confirming your frequency. It is making one decision each day that is native to the version of you who already has the thing. Not because the action is the cause, because the action closes the circuit. An incomplete circuit carries no current. It does not matter how much charge you generate on one end if the other end is disconnected. The action is the connection point. It is small, often. It does not have to be dramatic. It has to be native. You already know what native feels like. There are moments when you make a decision and something inside you does not argue with it. No second guessing, no internal negotiation. It just feels like you. Those moments are coherence. Your whole life can operate that way, not through discipline, through calibration. The work was always about coherence, not worthiness. Worthiness is a feeling, and feelings are weather. Coherence is a skill, and skills compound. Every day you practice transmitting on the right frequency, the signal gets cleaner. The static does not disappear all at once. It thins. It becomes intermittent. Then one day you notice it is mostly gone, and what is coming through is clear enough to act on, clear enough to recognize, clear enough to trust. Marcus's antenna was the right size the whole time. So is yours. The student studied the signal. The transmitter became it. And now you understand what that sentence means in a way that goes past the words. Becoming the transmitter does not mean performing the version of yourself that has the thing. It means making your daily frequency so consistent with that version that there is no detectable gap between who you are and who you are becoming. The signal does not have to travel to reach the destination. The destination has to be already present in the signal. You have spent 12 chapters dismantling the belief that some part of you was missing or broken or insufficient. This chapter is the last piece of that work. Nothing was missing. The circuit was incomplete, and you now know how to close it. Not once, not dramatically, not in a single transformative moment. Daily, quietly, through small decisions that are native to where you are going. The final chapter is not going to teach you something new. It is going to ask you a different kind of question, one that will tell you whether you are ready to stop studying the frequency and start living it. Chapter 14, the last manifestation book you'll need. There is a moment that appears in every human story. It has appeared in every culture that has ever left a record, in every language that has ever been spoken, in every time that has ever passed. It is the moment when a person stops searching outside themselves and turns, for the first time with real honesty, inward. Not because they have found all the answers, but because they have finally understood where the answers live. That moment is not a dramatic event. It does not announce itself. It is quiet. It feels almost like an exhale. And here is what makes it rare. Most people approach that moment, sense its weight, and then pick up another book, start another course, watch one more video. You are at that moment right now. The question this chapter places in front of you is simple, and it will take the entire chapter to answer properly. Are you going to keep studying the frequency, or are you finally going to live it? That question was where the last chapter left you, and it is the right place to begin the end. You have done real work in this book, not the comfortable kind of work where you highlight passages and feel inspired for a few hours. The kind that asked you to look at things you would rather not see. The gap between what you visualize and what you feel. The static that runs beneath every affirmation when the nervous system underneath has not been convinced. The incomplete circuit. That is the phrase that kept returning, chapter after chapter. Not a broken circuit. Not a wrong circuit. Incomplete. And now you know what completes it. Here is the open loop this chapter will close before the last word. Most people who finish a book like this one return to the same habits within 9 days. Not because the book failed them. Because they never built the daily practice that would make the insight automatic. 9 days. That is how long the average new resolution survives contact with an unchanged routine. So the question underneath everything in this final chapter is this: what will your routine look like tomorrow morning? Think about where you were when you started this book. Not just the circumstances. Think about the texture of how you felt. The low-grade frustration of doing the work, seeing some results, then watching things stall. The confusion of not knowing what you were missing. The suspicion, which you may not have voiced out loud, that maybe this whole thing was not actually real. You had the map, you were following the steps, and the signal kept breaking up, static instead of signal. You knew enough to know the antenna existed. You did not yet know it needed tuning before transmission could begin. That was the missing step. Coherence first. Always. Now here is what you actually have to do with that knowledge. Insight without a daily practice is just more content. And you have had enough content. What you need is a protocol so simple, so repeatable, and so grounded in what this book taught you that it replaces the habit of consuming more information about manifestation with the habit of actually practicing it. 4 steps every morning. Before the phone, before the news, before the to-do list pulls your attention into the day. The first step is the coherence reset. 2 minutes. Slow the breath, bring the rhythm of your chest and your mind into alignment. This is not meditation for its own sake. It is a deliberate act of tuning, clearing the static that accumulated overnight, settling the nervous system into a state where it can receive and transmit clearly. You have read about the antenna. This is how you tune it each morning. The second step is felt safety. 1 minute. Locate one specific thing in your immediate environment, not a vision of the future, something present and real that represents evidence of stability. A chair that holds your weight. A cup of something warm. The fact that your body carried you through another night. Felt safety is not gratitude practice as most people know it. It is the act of telling your nervous system, through concrete sensory evidence, that the threat has passed, because it cannot move toward a desired future while it is still scanning for danger in the present. The third step is present tense embodiment. 3 minutes, not visualization of what you want, embodiment of what you intend to feel today. The specific emotional state that your goal, once real, would produce in you. Close your eyes and feel that state now in the body, not as a performance, as a practice of making it familiar. The nervous system does not respond to images. It responds to felt states. You are not rehearsing a fantasy. You are rehearsing a frequency. The fourth step is congruent action. Before the morning is over, you take one action, 1, not 5, not 10, that belongs to the person you just embodied. Not a grand gesture. A specific, real, small action that the version of you who already has what you want would take today. An email sent, a decision made, a conversation started. Congruence is the final wire in the circuit. Without it, the other 3 steps build charge with nowhere to go. Coherence reset. Felt safety. Present tense embodiment. Congruent action. That is the complete circuit, and it takes less time than you spend scrolling before your feet hit the floor. Now close the loop. Those 9 days. The reason most people return to old habits is not weakness. It is that the new behavior has no anchor. It floats in the day, waiting for a moment of willpower to call it forward. Willpower is not a reliable resource, but a 4-step sequence done in the first 20 minutes of your morning becomes a structure the day can attach to. The anchor is the sequence itself. The sequence is not complicated enough to fail. It is simple enough to survive a hard morning, a distracted morning, a morning when everything feels uncertain. You do not do it because you feel like it. You do it because it is what you do now. That is the difference between someone who has read about manifestation and someone who practices it. There is a woman named Daria who spent 3 years collecting techniques. Vision boards, scripting, affirmations. She had notebooks full of them. She was not lazy about it. She was devoted, but her results were inconsistent and she could not understand why. Then she spent 1 week doing only these 4 steps, nothing else, before 8 in the morning. At the end of the week, she had not attracted a miracle. What she had done was send 3 emails she had been postponing for months. One of them led to a conversation. That conversation led to an opportunity she had spent 2 years visualizing and never moving toward. The miracle was not the opportunity. The miracle was the email. The complete circuit finally closed. You see it now. You have always seen it. The knowledge was never the missing piece. The missing piece was the morning. Here is your mirror moment. Right now, in this second, ask yourself one question. When you wake up tomorrow, what is the first thing you will reach for? Be honest, not aspirational, honest. Because whatever that first thing is, it is currently setting the frequency for your entire day. If that first thing is a screen, a feed, a stream of other people's realities pouring into your nervous system before you have even tuned your own, you are starting the day in static. You have always had the option to start it in signal. Now you have the sequence that makes that possible. This book was never going to change your life. Books do not change lives. What changes a life is what a person does on a Tuesday morning when nothing feels urgent, nothing feels inspired, and the old habit is right there waiting. What you do on that Tuesday is who you are becoming. You do not need another book after this one. You need tomorrow morning. Go meet it.